Testing 1, 2. Evening all. Welcome to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee on Tuesday the 30th of July 2024. I'm Chris Pearson, Labour Councillor for Beerchurch, and I chair this meeting. In the event of any emergency this evening, and I'm not expecting any practice alarms, we'll be expected to evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the rear staircase into the High Street and then to the car park behind the town hall in St Runwell Street. This meeting is being held in the Grand Jury Room at Colchester Town Hall and is also being broadcast live over the internet, where it can be watched via the Council's YouTube channel. Those recordings will be available afterwards as well. Please, during the meeting, would speakers speak clearly and into the microphone and ensure that they switch them off after they finish speaking. Members of the committee and any members of the public in attendance may use electronic devices to access meeting papers. You're welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly. And I would just remind members that your phone should be on silent, otherwise the Mayor's charities will benefit. There are toilets on every floor in the building and an induction loop in this room. We will have a short break at 7:30 p.m. And I'm now just going to ask people to introduce themselves, starting from my left.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Smith, Vice Chair, St Anne's and St John's.
Good evening, Richard Block, Chief Operating Officer.
Good evening, Andrew Weavers, Head of Governance.
Hayley McGrath, Corporate Governance Manager.
Good evening, I'm Matthew Howe, I'm Senior Procurement Consultant.
William Sunnox, Councillor for Rural North Ward.
Councillor Sarah Naylor, Lexton and Braithwaite Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Dundas, Tiptree Ward.
Faith Smalls, Councillor for Old Heath, The Hive and Rowhedge, substituting for Sam McLean.
Hello, Councillor Sean Kelly, Wivenhoe.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome this evening. As Councillor Smalls has just indicated, she's substituting for Councillor Sam McLean this evening, so that's item 2 dealt with. Move on to item 3. Now, the papers in front of you suggest that there are no urgent matters. However, I believe that there is one that Councillor Dundas would like to raise, and I will respond to that request accordingly.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it relates to the potential situation with the Northern Gateway Sports and what we may have seen in the press regarding the financial position of one of the potential tenants. I would suggest, having also had a conversation with yourself, that maybe in case we stray into confidential areas, this may be best done in confidential session.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. So I've had a discussion with you before the meeting. I've also had a discussion with the committee clerk, and it's my view that we've already got a Part B on the agenda this evening, so I will allow for some limited discussion in the confidential section of the meeting later on. Thank you. Item 4 then is declarations of interest. Anyone have anything to declare around items that are on the agenda this evening? No? Minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of June. Are there any inaccuracies that anyone's identified? No? Can those of you who were present please indicate whether or not those are accepted? Agreed. Thank you. Move on to item 6. Have your say. I'm not aware of any. And what I'm going to do now, which is slightly unusual, is just switch the agenda around, because I'm aware that Councillor Corey is with us online, but is somewhere in deepest, darkest Norfolk, where the Wi-Fi is not always the best. And we don't have anyone from the finance team with us this evening. But what I'm going to do is just introduce item 10, the Q4 Budget Monitoring Report at this stage. You'll all be aware that we were expecting to have a written report on the Q4 outturn for 23-24. Unfortunately, Chris Hartgrove and the team haven't been able to get that to us in time for this meeting. I have asked that that be circulated to all members of the committee as soon as it is ready, and it will form an item for debate and discussion at our September meeting. I'm just going to ask Richard Block to make a few comments, and I'll pick up as well. Chris Hartgrove has sent something out in a brief email to myself and to Richard and to Councillor Corey this afternoon. So we'll just update everyone with what's in that, and I'll give anyone who has any queries the opportunity to just make remarks to either Councillor Corey or to Richard Block. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies to committee members that the report's not in front of you. Of course, Chris Hartgrove attended the group spokes meeting prior to this to explain progress with the outturn position, and in broad terms how that was looking. Two factors have led to the finance team not being able to present the report tonight. One, particular complexities around the hibernation of some of our companies, which the committee are well aware of through previous discussions, and there has been a particular HR issue which I can't go into in the committee regarding the team that they've been dealing with a key member of staff in the last week, which has prevented the papers from being able to present. So apologies again, but as the Chair said, papers will be circulated at the earliest opportunity when they're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Corey, is there anything you want to say at this stage?
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for the opportunity to talk. Just to let members know, I did speak to Councillor Pearson as chair of the meeting to try and organise today as best as possible, because I did want to give some information on where we were, and Richard's just explained some of that, but also to explain some of the positives in terms of how close we are to having that outturn report in your possession. I have the headlines of that report, and it is an improved picture from where it was reported to you last time. So the overspend that we predict is much lower than we were reporting throughout the year, especially at the half-year period. So we are at a much lower overspend. That is good. Also, the company hibernation was mentioned, something that this committee has been very keen to look into. The outturn that we have got includes the company hibernations and includes those costs, and has not sent the budget sort of further the wrong way. It has been managed within this year, so I'm very happy about that. I know that members on the committee still understand and want to continue to be focused on the risk associated with the assets that we hold, for example, the boreholes, and that's an ongoing interest. But in terms of the actual loans and the winding up of those costs for the companies, those are included in the outturn report that will come to you soon. And as I say, that headline is that actually we've reduced the overspend that we were forecasting. So it is around, the general fund is around 450 overspend, but Chris still wants to ensure that every I has been dotted and T has been crossed, and for reasons to do with specific staffing, that hasn't happened just yet, and also because of the company work being a bit more complex as well. Otherwise, I think we know where slippages continue to occur, the biggest one being temporary accommodation and the vast costs of that, continuing with homelessness and making sure families do not go homeless. So that's the biggest in terms of our overspends, and we will continue to target looking at where other overspends have occurred. Underspends come from things like the capital programme, which we've been more cautious with, and therefore less need to carry out certain costs and certain borrowing. So overall, the picture I am fairly confident of, and I hope it will come to you soon. But of course, we have other risks that are at play, but there's ways in which we believe we can address those, but we still need to get the final picture, bearing in mind the question asked earlier by Councillor Dundas. That's our largest risk in terms of general fund at the moment, but we'll continue to keep all parties updated and continue to update you when we get the final outturn report as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. I'll just add, looking at what Chris Hartgrove circulated to me earlier, that the general fund reserves are at circa £30 million. It's just over, as at the 31st of March, taking account of additional surpluses in business rates of £4.2 million at December 2023. The HRA revenue budget is at a little over £250,000 deficit, and capital outturn, the general fund budget of £87.7 million, the outturn was 9.7 with an underspend of 78 million. All these figures obviously will come to us with the finalised report that I say I've asked to be circulated to all members as soon as it's been produced. I'll take questions and comments. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, could I take the opportunity to ask Councillor Corey a couple of questions? The first is, we keep on seeing, changes from our last forecast and so on, but I think that the last forecast we saw said that our income was less than our expenditure would be expected to be less than our expenditure last year by £6 million, and therefore there would be a decline in reserve of about £6 million. Does he have a feel for where that figure stands now? I think we get ourselves so confused with all our reserves and our budget actual movements that we sometimes forget the bigger picture, which is that our income and our expenditure are not in line by a very large amount. And the second question is, we are going to have to do a valuation of our Northern Gateway, of the Turnstone development at the 31st of March this year. Has that valuation been commissioned, and has it been done? And it might be confidential, but I just want to know whether we're on top of that, because that was a recommendation of a link report that we got a while ago. Two questions.
Thank you, Councillor Sunnox. Councillor Corey.
Thank you. The second question first. I can't give you the feedback on that as yet. As you know, we've got a lot of attention in that area at the moment. That's something I'll have to take away and ask Patricia Barry for. But we do have a general book indication, but as you say, we were going back for evaluation, most up-to-date one. So I'll have to come back to you on that one, and that will link into the other discussions we're having on that topic. Just going back to the first question, I think you have spoken about the difference between income and expenditure, which again, we continue to talk about how we are balancing a budget, but we are, for example, last year we looked at putting about 200,000 into reserves. The reserves are absolutely holding up. There's a change in about £200,000 of the reserves. We are carrying out our final review of the reserves following the outturn report. And again, I'll share that with you and with members of the committee. But you have talked before, Councillor Sunnox, about eating into the reserves and using them. We are not doing that. It is not the process that we're following. We aim to provide a balanced budget each year for reasons that I've partly explained. For example, homelessness, temporary accommodation. We've spent more this year, so there's an overspend we predict of around 450,000, but that has been offset by different decisions, either increased income or less expenditure, for example, with financing costs on the capital programme. But the actual revenue income and revenue expenditure, we try to land upon a balanced budget each year. So therefore, we are not eating into the reserves. So what I will do for you is put forward the reserves showing a number of years where we have pretty much kept them about the same. They've increased actually during some of the COVID times where we had to slow down certain expenditure and the business rates kept coming in despite everything. So actually, we are looking positive with our reserves. We're not eating into them. So I can go through that when we have the full outturn report, but also when we have the review of the reserves, which should come at the same time.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. Councillor Sunnox, I'll allow you just to come back on that last point, but bear in mind that we will have a more detailed look at the outturn in September.
Yes, thank you, Mark, for saying you'd come back on the reserves. Can I urge you, when you're looking at that, to look at the last Q3 monitoring report we have, and look at it carefully, and look at that £6 million, which is sitting there as our consumption reserves there, and take away all the nonsense, all the budget pluses and minuses that we have in the year. And I think you'll find that we are eating into reserve by 6 million, or we thought we were then. If it's a little bit better than that, then that's good news. But I think we need to be clear-headed about where we are. So I just ask you to look at that, and also remember that red lights are flashing on the SIPFA index about our use of reserves. We've got 3 out of 6 SIPFA red lights flashing against us, and we somehow seem to talk ourselves out of worrying about it every time.
Thank you, Councillor Sunnox. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, Councillor Sunnox, as he so often does, has mentioned, as I was going to, the Q3 report we saw here in March. I think Councillor Corey mentioned a figure of around 400,000, 450,000 overspend. Now, at Q3, the anticipated general fund budget overspend was 1.916 million, but that excluded the wage settlement which had just taken place, which was estimated to have an extra impact of around 600,000. So that's an anticipated overspend of around 2.5 million. So if that's come down to sort of 400 or 450,000, that seems quite a dramatic change for the better of around £2 million. So is that the kind of magnitude we're looking at in improvement?
Councillor Corey?
Yes. So what happened with the pay increase was that we accepted that pay increase, but I said, supported very much by the leader, to Cabinet and to senior officers, that we had to find that in year. We had to address that immediately because we could not take that further and have £600,000 cost pressure on revenue in year and then effectively next year accumulative. So we addressed the wage increase immediately. It was just short of £600,000 in which we made resource cuts really in order to address that pay increase. And then we have worked through a lot of the refocusing of the Fit for the Future programme to bring down that 1.9 million. As you say, that was what we were predicting at Q3. You may know, most of you around the table, that we often can bring it back closer when we sort of either don't take carry forwards, which we bring back into the budget and say if that project hasn't reached fruition when it should have done and isn't going forward, then we will take that back in. So for a number of reasons, that has helped. But also what is quite clear is the capital programme and being more small c conservative and understanding not to progress with some of the projects, and also because of the economic climate as well, not progressing with certain projects, so therefore not carrying as much financial costs. The business rates has helped us. We've put a little bit more into the base budget because we are doing very well and outperforming on that. So hopefully that answers your questions there, Paul.
Councillor Dundas, I'll just pick up a line from Chris Hartgrove's email that says, the improved position is explained by the decision not to roll forward unspent budgets in a range of areas, totalling 1.455 million. So I think that gives an indication of where a significant chunk of that change has come from. But as I've already said, we will look at the detail of the Q4 outturn at our next meeting.
Thank you. I think that does answer my question. It sounds like it's the capital budget. On the reserves, as Councillor Sunnock's just mentioned, back in Q3, the reduction in reserves was forecast at 6.039 million. Basic maths, if we've improved that by 2 million, which it sounds like we're still looking at about a 4 million use of reserves last year. Just back of the envelope calculation.
Right, thank you. In terms of there was something else. I've just suddenly gone. Did I see another hand? No, didn't think so. Richard, anything else that you wanted to?
No, I think it's been said. Obviously, members will have an opportunity to review the detail that we've started to dip into tonight. I think we've covered the main points influencing the outturn. Thank you.
Thank you. So, with that in mind, I think we've had a reasonable small bite of the cherry. It's disappointing that we haven't got the documents in front of us this evening, but I think, as Richard Block has already indicated, there are some rational reasons for that not being the case. But as I say, I've requested that as soon as the documents are completed, that they are circulated to members long before the September meeting. Thank you. So that's item 10. So we'll go back to item 7, which is procurement. And I think, I have seen that Sam Preston is online and Matt Howe is with us this evening. I think, Matt, you're going to do the presentation to us, aren't you? And Sam's just here to hold hands if need be. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, apologies if I'm a bit starry, but I've done this before, so I'll give it my best shot. But anyway, initially we've had 2 audits, probably since the last time this was reported on at this committee. The first one was in 22, and there was the audit came back with limited assurance, and there was 9 outstanding actions. Obviously, we've significantly worked on those since the audit was undertaken, and then we had a further audit in 23. And again, although it was still a limited assurance, there was only 2 key points that were identified through the audit, which I think shows a significant improvement and good progress. The 2 outstanding points, one relates to the use of waiver forms throughout the council. We have significantly changed the way that's now done. All waivers now have to come via procurement, namely through myself, and then they need to be approved by the relevant officer, or where appropriate, they'll go up to the relevant portfolio holder. for approval. Once they are approved, they are then now recorded on our procurement SharePoint site, so we've got full traceability for that, of which Audit have recognised. And in addition, we also then add those to the contracts register, so we should now have all contracts listed that have gone through that part of the process. The other area which was probably more significant in my mind was about the suppliers with the over £45,000 spend. So that, with that, we've initially identified a number of areas of which we are either worked on and have now put things in place, or are currently working on to improve that part of the audit. Obviously, that was a snapshot taken 2 years ago of annual spend. Annual spend, obviously, with suppliers continues, so we're continually monitoring that. Obviously, when the new finance system finally goes live, that will give us a far more intuitive method of looking at our spend throughout the council. So we'll be able to be more proactive in looking at spends which are creeping up towards the 45,000 spend per supplier. We then identify how we're then going to resolve that, whether it be through a tender process, the use of many different frameworks, and more significantly over time, we're now looking to collaborate more with neighbouring authorities, which I think is going to see significant improvements as well. In addition to that, of course, obviously, that's what was identified from the audit. There's a number of areas that we're still looking to improve upon. A significant impact that's going to on procurement will be later this year with the new Procurement Act that came in 23, which goes live. It's anticipated 28th of October of this year. There will be significant changes to the way that we have to produce information, report on that information through national forums, which are still to be completely cleared up. Obviously, that may then have a significant impact as well on constitutional requirements, but obviously we will work on those once we know the outcomes of the actual Act once it comes into force. I think that probably covers everything I was going to say. I don't know if anyone's got any questions at all.
Thank you, and for your first meeting, very well done. Thank you. Okay, just a reminder to everyone that there is a confidential attachment to this item. So I would say to everyone, if you have anything that's related to the confidential matter, could you just let me know at this stage, because we'll hold that off until we go into part B later on this evening. If you don't have anything, could you please indicate that as well, because if there's nothing that you have to do with the confidential items, we will allow Matt and Sam to exit stage left and not stay on for the whole of the evening. Right, I've seen a hand go up. Councillor Sunnox, Councillor Dundas, Councillor Smalls. Councillor Sunnox.
I've got nothing on the confidential part, but I can't resist having a senior procurement consultant sitting next door to me, to just ask, to give us a little bit of colour. There'll be people all over the council wanting to do procurement, and how does the centralisation work, and have we got the right level of centralisation, and are the road departments going off and doing procurement without your approval? Terrible.
Thank you for that question. I suppose the easiest part of that to say is there are still some rogue activity that does go on. We are aware of that. It is improving. I would say that most departments do generally come through us initially for advice, and then we will steer them in the correct direction, so they can obviously either undertake the relevant procurement themselves, or depending on the nature of the activity, obviously the procurement team will undertake it for them. So it's a two-pronged attack really. So where it's practical and feasible, we will allow them to do it. Obviously where they need our advice, they'll come to us. We are significantly trying to improve the way that we do that, and how officers can come to us, so they make it clearer, so we capture everything. We're looking to introduce some new online forms. I can't go into detail on it purely because we haven't quite formalised it yet. We're having a meeting on that next week. We've also significantly improved both the external website and also the information on Colin. Again, that is a ongoing process, but we're looking to be able to provide more and more information on there to make it easier for officers to obtain the information they need, and also to direct them in the, correctly so they can then put any requests for future works through. Obviously, again, we're looking at works with collaborating with other authorities as well. So there, in time, there will hopefully be more assistance from other authorities to help us with our procurements as well, which I think will be a benefit. And I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring Richard Block in at this point as well.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to give the committee further reassurance that our financial procedure rules also mean that that kind of rogue activity tends to be the lower level values of spend, because as spend increases, the level of hierarchy that it needs to be signed off to also increases, which brings in a great level of control, just to reassure the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I have nothing in the confidential section, by the way. Yeah, it's just observation, really, and this isn't a criticism. You know, we are charged with getting best value where we can for procurement, and in particular for the taxpayer. But looking through the some of the areas identified, we do seem to be moving towards more. How can I put it, corporate sort of suppliers, for example, stationery going to one Essex-wide supplier, tree surgery, looks like we're appointing one contractor for the whole of the borough. The only downside to that is that it does perhaps exclude smaller, locally based suppliers. If you look at tree surgery, for example, there might be a company who could perhaps cope with doing all the trees in Tiptree, all the trees in Dedham, or all the trees in Highwoods, but perhaps couldn't cope with doing all the trees across the whole borough. There's probably not a lot we can do about that, but I'm just sort of asking, you know, do we at least think about that when we're looking at these policies? Because I wouldn't want Colchester-based businesses to feel that they're really being almost quite deliberately excluded or pushed out of being able to bid for CCC tenders, really.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. Good question, although I would just remind you we are the City of Colchester, not the Borough of Colchester.
It's always difficult when you're talking about the whole area. I call it City Borough, but it's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
Matt, do you have an answer to that?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, first of all, whenever we put out any tenders, before they even go out, obviously we have good discussion with our, relevant officers, and I will pick on the tree surgery one as an example. It's unlikely that we would look just to appoint one contractor, first of all, because conscious of what you've just picked up on about, a supplier could do it in Tiptree, as the example you've given, but also with certain areas like tree surgery again, it's an area where if you only had one contractor, and God forbid that we end up with a massive storm, and trees go over everywhere, obviously they would then be too limited. So that is an area that we would look to have more than one supplier anyway. Further on from that as well, whenever we issue tenders, we always, personally, we use frameworks. For those that don't know, a framework normally is a nationally based procurement activity that's already gone ahead, of which you can either do a mini competition or a direct award. Often with national frameworks, you get national suppliers. Generally, where we can, and I tend to sort of insist that we will issue tenders that are open to all contractors. Obviously, the procurement regulations do sometimes put additional hurdles in the way, if you like, additional steps, so they have to go through more process to be successful. But fundamentally, any contractor can apply, and obviously we'll do financial checks to make sure that they've got the capabilities to do the works. But I mean, if you look at a number of the suppliers that the council currently utilises, we do actually work with a multitude of local suppliers. So I wouldn't want to see that change. I think just because you picked up on it as well, in regards to the stationery, that one we will look. That is something that Essex CC we're looking at. It's something that we will look at. It's not to say that something that we will definitely go with. We may feel that it's better to look at it on a more localised basis. But again, every area that we look at, we look at all the pros and cons we make sure it's right for Colchester. That's the most important thing, I think.
Thank you, Matt. And I'm anticipating that with larger scale procurement, we're looking at hopefully gaining some benefits from economy of scale in the contract. Okay, Councillor Smalls.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a bit croaky. I'd like to learn more about what social value in procurement means, because it says apparently, sorry, we're making significant progress in ensuring we have a strong social value in our procurement. So I'm trying to get my head around in the real world what that means. For example, does it mean the companies that are supplying us, are we looking at how they treat their employees? Are we looking at how green they are? I just don't know if you've got any real world examples of that, because I can I've sort of seen this phrase social value sort of in lots of contexts. So I'm just thinking in terms of us physically buying things and services, what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. With the social value, obviously, it came in, I think about 2018 now, I think, from memory. In 2020, Colchester decided to go down the route of using a third-party company to assist us on the social value. So I'll just give a bit of background, and I'll actually answer the direct question. How that works is that they analyse the bids on our behalf, and what happens is there's a whole host of, they're called themes, outcomes and measures, or TOMs from the shortened version, and there's a whole multitude of those. I think from the national TOMs there's about 60 to 80 different measures, and they encompass a whole multitude of things, from employment to buying locally, to training needs, to working with colleges, charitable donations or work, carbon footprint, environmental issues. The ones that's on there also dealt with the health issues obviously we had through COVID. That's just a few examples. Colchester currently, our list, I believe, sits at around about 50, I think it is. It does need to be refreshed. I'm working with the Social Value Portal on that to reduce that list, to most importantly make it easier for suppliers when they bid for Colchester's requirements, to make it easier for them. At the moment, whenever we do the tenders, and it's only for tenders where they've got a value over £100,000, that we implement the Social Value Portal requirements. And then obviously, and then they report, and then the social value then give us information, and that gives us a breakdown of the areas in which suppliers have had spend. So what it will give you overall, it will tell you what the overall spend has been through the contracts that we've issued through the portal. It will then give you a breakdown of what that spend has been locally, and then it further breaks it down into all the different areas. For contracts below 100, we don't actually use the TOMs and use that element of it, because there's a cost to that, both to council and to supplier. So obviously we're mindful of that. But we do ask questions, and we tend to ask them, about employing locally, or are they going to use like apprentice schemes? If they are going to employ, do they look at like long-term unemployed? Obviously, being a garrison city as well, we ask the question about will they employ ex-military personnel? So they're the sorts of questions that all get asked. Obviously, then you've got the areas around the environment, about carbon footprint, use of electric vehicles, just to name a few. So it's something that is quite key to the procurements. Something that we're still trying to. It is a work in progress, if I'm honest, and it's something that we will look to work on. And in fact, even today, I had a meeting with one of our local suppliers who was having a few difficulties with using the portal and understanding the mechanisms behind how it works. So I went through it with him this morning, and following our meeting, he's a lot more comfortable about how he reports and what benefits potentially will be shown for the council. And I'm more than happy to go through that with people in more detail. Like I say, what I need to do now, and my team, we really need to focus on it and to be able to drill that down to make it easier, so we can report on it in a more efficient way, which potentially could then come to a meeting such as this and actually be able to give some actual real detail as to what the actual benefits are locally, which I think is the important thing.
No, thank you.
Anything, Faye, that you want to follow up with? No? I think it would be useful, Matt, in the future, if once you've got that capability, for us to actually see, what the social value of not necessarily specific contracts, because they may be commercially confident, but just what we're getting in terms of social value from our procurement. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I too have nothing on the confidential items. I'd like to ask a question on the procurement about how well we're picking up areas such as the museum service and Culture Borough homes, which are not directly within us, particularly to ensure we're aggregating them to get to the £45,000 level. And perhaps if I also may give Councillor Swalls some assurance on social value. I've actually been doing a couple of contracts this afternoon. I've done one on garage doors refurbishment, and you might care to have a look at that one to see how the points are allocated, a proportion on the price of the contract and a proportion on various questions that the contractors have asked. Obviously, it's different ones for each particular contract, but that might be a good example for you to have a look at it. And it does mean, as I've done in one of the ones today, I haven't gone for the one with the lowest price. I've gone for one that's actually slightly more expensive, but the social value is an awful lot higher. So those are the key determinants there. But say if I could ask a question about how you're aggregating across the family of companies, a group of organisations.
Well, firstly, thank you for giving that extra bit of explanation about the social value. I think that was useful. I hope that makes sense for everyone. But to actually answer your question, first, if I tackle Culture Borough Home first, because that is, I think, quite an easy one, because we do a lot of work with those. I'm forever putting out tenders and liaising with them on contracts to ensure that we're making sure they're compliant, most importantly. But obviously, we put out the tenders. We went through a process with them when they were looking at more short-term contracts, which meant they were continually being refreshed. We're now looking at longer term, and they're very keen on using local suppliers where we can, where it's applicable. Obviously, making sure that we drive costs down, which obviously is key, because especially when obviously with the funding where the money's coming from on our housing stock, if they're not obviously if the budget is, for example, £1 million, but we've got one contractor who's offering to do the project at 10,000 per property, and one's doing it at 5. Obviously, economies of scale. If the one that's lower offers a better opportunity, then obviously we're going to get more properties done within the budget. So we're certainly identifying that. They've also recognised as well where they've not been compliant in some of their lower spend areas, and I'm continually having conversations with CBH staff on how we can improve that, and that's being done through a multitude of either tenders or use of frameworks, or obviously making sure they go through the 3-quote process, similarly to what we insist obviously the council does. So I think that probably covers the CBH side. The museum side, obviously, don't deal with them as often, if I'm honest. But when they do require advice, or they've got projects that they do, they always come to us. We obviously will give them the right information. I think that potentially that is an area that we could look at in a bit more depth. But again, I think it's because the nature of perhaps their spend is a little bit different, and in some respects. But we certainly do look at that. I mean, obviously with the museums as well, obviously they look often to generate income as well, don't they, through the sale of items within their shops, within the museums, etc. And again, they often come through us to make sure they're going through that in a compliant way. So where we can, we try and help them as much as we can as well, to be fair. I would probably say though that CBH is probably an area of procurement time that is very high, and we do a lot with them. But I guess the nature of the spend that they have is significantly higher than perhaps some of our other, not a department, but if you like, if you compare it to a department. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Smith.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could I just ask a little bit more on that, on the CBH area? Temporary accommodation, that's an area of very considerable expense for the council. How are we ensuring the procurement rules work well in that area, where we have a large number of providers, some of whom members have raised concerns about the quality of the product that they're producing?
I think that's a very fair question, and I can't really give you the answer that I would like to give you or can give you, because it's not an area that I've been overly involved with, unfortunately. We are making efforts to liaise with the right people within CBH to tackle that, because it's identified, and we all appreciate that's an area that does need to be looked at. So I would say it is an area that needs to be looked at with some urgency.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would appreciate if that was done.
I was just going to say, Matt, could I ask that you and Sam take that one away and provide a response in writing to members of the committee within a month of what, if anything, is being done? Thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. It's just a quick question. I'm sure there's a pretty quick answer to it. When you say that you are doing a review of suppliers with a spend of over 45k, what timescale is that 45 grand taken over? Is that like within one invoice, within one financial year? And how is it broken down? Because like elsewhere in my other life, so to speak, when I see stuff like this, not necessarily me, but other people might go, oh, we know what the cut-off is for getting underneath the sort of point of scrutiny. We know what the budgetary thing is, so we'll go, oh, we'll stick it in at 44, and we'll put another invoice in at 44, and when neither of them gets looked at because they both go under the budget, but actually if we were to look at them within the same financial time frame, they would be, well, that's 88, actually that's over the thing. So what sort of checks are in place to stop sort of effectively like company splitting or any form of thing that allows slightly under the radar type activity to happen? I'm not sure. I don't know whether it happens here at all. Maybe it just doesn't. But I've seen similar things to what I describe elsewhere, and I'm sure people try it. And how do you stop it?
Firstly, what we do at the moment, again, I alluded to earlier about the finance system. Obviously, when we get the new finance system, that's going to be more intuitive to give us more information. At the moment, obviously, when we look at aggregate spend per supplier, it's reactive, isn't it? Because obviously we look at the previous 12 months or the previous period of time we look at. So that is often when that gets identified. And what we do as well at the moment, and the team, whenever any purchase order comes through now over £10,000, it comes to me first for me to say, what process has that been through? Has it been through the free quote process? Has it been through a tender process or not? And often if the case that hasn't, then we'll go back to the relevant party to rectify that problem. But obviously what we're then doing as well, we're keeping a tally, if you like, of where these spends are. So we start to see where there is growth, and then we can then look to put something in place. Obviously, if you've got a supplier, someone does put a PO in at, say, 40,000 in July, and then they do another one in August. Obviously, currently, because of the way we can interrogate the finance system, we won't necessarily pick that up until afterwards. But once we do pick it up, obviously we then react on it straight away. We continue with the training processes as well that we're doing, which is what I emphasised earlier about the changes we've made to the intranet and the intranet site. We've got a lot more flow diagrams and that on there now, and we're doing more training, so officers are aware of what the council's rules are with regards to spend with suppliers. So where there has been a little bit of rogue activity or there's things like that have been done, going forward we should be rectifying that. So it's still a work in progress, but I think in quite a short time we should be able to improve on that quite significantly, I would think.
Thank you. Does that answer your... Okay, I think that's a good question that we did raise last week, didn't we, at the briefing? Okay, lots of comments, questions, queries. No doubt we'll see how this is all going in 12 months' time. You'll be able to report back how the new system is working, whether or not there are any outliers that we should be wary of. But sounds like the work on procurement is moving definitely in the right direction after one or two concerns that were expressed by this committee over previous meetings. And I think everyone's indicated that there is nothing that they want to raise on the confidential items. So I would say to you and to Sam, thank you very much for your attendance this evening, your contribution, and you're welcome to depart now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right, that moves us on to item 8, year-end review of risk management. And we have another newbie to introduce this one. He says with his tongue firmly in his cheek. Over to you, Hayley. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Chair. I'll pretend that I've never presented to you before and that you've never heard me go on about risk management or talk about the strategic risk register or any of our risks. So the report that you've got in front of you is the year-end report for 2023-24. And all joking aside, for those members that I may not have presented to before, we bring 2 reports on risk management to you a year. It's the year-end report, and then we do a 6-monthly interim report, giving an update on our strategic risks and the direction of travel of the organisation. So for the year-end review, what I'm asking you to do is look at our performance during the year, April 23 to March 24, look at the current strategic risk register and comment on the issues that are raised on there, and also consider and comment on the proposed risk management strategy for 24-25 and endorse the submission of the report to Cabinet to approve the risk management strategy going forwards. The reason I ask you to do that is that the risk management strategy forms part of our policy framework, so it is part of our constitution. Therefore, it is signed off by Cabinet and is ratified by full council going forwards. So if I start with the work that's been undertaken during the period, as well as the normal day-to-day stuff, because obviously there is general day-to-day risk management work that goes on in terms of maintaining the registers and providing advice and guidance to officers. There's been a lot of focus during the year on governance arrangements. Quite a lot of that has been reported to yourselves in various forms, especially relating to the companies, and also ensuring that there are mechanisms for discharging the shareholder responsibilities, which I know that you're keenly aware of. We've also been advising services across the organisation with controls and identified the issues in the strategic risk register and making sure that the controls are in place, and also looking at issues that have been raised during the year. And as part of the work, not just the strategic side of risk, but we have a lot of operational risk as well. And we have a very large health and safety programme where we've been working alongside services, and you'll get a health and safety report later on in the year that gives you a lot more information on it. But some of the things that we've been doing are looking at things like litter picking on the A12, which is a key issue, and making sure that officers are safe while they're able to do that, and also embedding our health and safety management system across the organisation. As I say, later on in the year, our health and safety manager will report to you on those actions. We also work with the Colchester Safety Advisory Group, looking at event plans and external insurance arrangements, and I work for or assist the Joint Museum Service and the North Essex Parking Partnership with their risk registers and their governance processes as well. So going on to the strategy, before I go back to the strategic risk register, I'll leave the best bit till last. The strategy is reviewed every year. We do a fundamental review just to make sure that it is still fit for purpose, to make sure it does what we need it to do, and take into account any audit assessments that we've had during the year, if there's any recommendations. So I've updated it for 24-25, and it's attached to Appendix 3. I'm not making any proposed changes to the risk process. It works, it provides us with the reassurance that we need, and has been signed off by auditors. What I would say is there is an update in the reporting side, and I'll go on to that in a little bit more in the strategic risk register, but to say that our senior leadership board has changed their report review of the register. So going on to the strategic risk register, obviously we set out the key strategic risks, and the significant change is that the senior leadership board review the register every month. So it was reviewed quarterly previously and reported 6 monthly to this committee. Our board now consider that it's important that it's reviewed monthly and the issues are raised quite quickly. So that makes it a little bit more agile in terms of responding to some of those issues and concerns that are being raised. As we know, there is a rapidly changing risk environment for various reasons, from cybersecurity through to finances and obviously our Fit for the Future agenda. So it was felt that it was more appropriate to do that more regular reporting. For the majority of 23-24, the strategic risks were pretty consistent, as I think you would probably expect. and have concentrated on the 4 key areas. The key one being IT, and I think we discussed this last time as part of the annual audit report. IT and cyber security are fundamental issues, and only recently, as a week ago last Friday, we saw that national issue. Whilst that wasn't a cyber attack, it was a software update, it caused worldwide issues. So for us, it really does highlight the importance of those cyber and IT issues for us. The other areas where we are identifying key risks are organisational resilience, the budget strategy, economic climate, workforce wellbeing. You know, our employees are a key part of being able to deliver our services, financial equality and our assets, the recognition that the corporate assets and obviously the change in the way that we're managing those with the corporate landlord model has highlighted that. And it's whether you have any questions.
Thank you, Hayley. Introduced as ever in your erudite style. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I want to say what I've said before, which is I think this is presented elegantly, and it's and it really sounds, it gives you sort of a feeling that we've looked at all the strategic high level risks, but we're not covering it. We're not covering it. If you look at the risks that drive councils like this into real trouble, I'm sure cybersecurity comes in somewhere, but it's in those project risks. Think of Thurrock, think of Woking, think of, think of the people who've got into trouble. It's those project risks, and we miss it every time. And I raise it every time, and it slips away from us. So we have to think of a way that we can start capturing those project risks. We can try and get some way of evaluating what they are, evaluating the resources. A lot of these are complicated development projects. We're not able to outface the counterparties. We've got to have a team with the experience to deal with these, with what we're doing. And we just don't seem to have any way of, without pulling ourselves down too much, just saying, can we cope with this project? So project risk, we have to find a way of doing something about it.
Thank you, Councillor Sunnox, and I agree with you. I mean, we're sitting under a roof at the moment that wasn't properly project managed. So I'll come back and ask Hayley to just respond.
Absolutely, and I totally take your point, Councillor Sunnox, and I know you've raised it before, and the Chief Operating Officer and I have had a conversation about the project risks. They are reported, and they're reported to officer groups and the Project Delivery Board, but we recognise there's a missing element in terms of supporting the strategic risk register coming to yourselves. So we are going to work on a way of reporting that to you and bring that to you in a future meeting as part of the risk report, so you see those project risks. It won't be in huge detail, but it will give you the overview of those risks, because it's not about looking at those risks in great detail. It's a bit like the strategic risk register. We'll give you something along those lines so you can see those risks. So there is that report process.
Thank you. And I mean, at the risk of moving us on to the next item on the agenda too quickly, when we do start to discuss and debate how the G&A committee should operate going forward, we will probably be doing a lot more of that deeper diving and looking and expectation and recommendation, rather than just noting and commenting as we've tended to do. Right, anyone else? No? Cool, all right. I'll have a quick go then. Yeah, so just looking at the very high risk, we've got the organisational resilience, and I suppose these are probably not as much for you to comment on, Hayley, as for Richard to comment on about where we're at with organisational resilience, because it does actually say, and I bear in mind that this is a public document now, in the description column, that organisational resilience is low. So my question, I suppose, is, since this was prepared, is it still low or is it improving? If it's not, where are we at in terms of the mitigations that are shown in that column? Richard?
I would definitely say it's improving, Chair. So we have a range of activities that have been put into place to respond to this risk. A massive focus on employee wellbeing and morale, with a range of different activities to deal with that, whether that's from an enhanced employee assistance program, which is basically support for our staff when they're struggling, whether it's activities to really build camaraderie amongst our workforce. We've got a staff Olympics that have just been launched for people to kind of carry out activities outside of work and then talk about them in work, things like pet photo competitions, step challenges, and the like. So a whole host of kind of softer activities, but I would also just remind the committee about some of the harder elements as well. So our shared services programme, where we're working closely with colleagues in Epping and Braintree to really bring together some of those teams that we've struggled to be resilient in. We talked about one of them earlier in finance, where I anticipate in the next half of the year we'll be talking about a far more detailed case around a shared finance service with colleagues in Epping, and that work will continue to increase resilience in those areas. So not there yet, Chair, but certainly improving.
Thank you for that. Sorry, I touched it and lost it for a moment. So that's good to hear, Richard. The next one, just a quick question from me about cyber and data security, coming back to the fact that it's not, you know, we often get fixated on, but we know that when it does go wrong, it goes badly wrong, as it did the other weekend. And I do recall when we moved, as most organisations did, from their standalone servers to utilising the cloud, that I was particularly exercised at the time about whether or not the cloud that we utilised is in the States, in the UK, or in the EU, and I was particularly concerned that it might be in the States. Do we have a response?
Yes, we do, and we've had it in writing from the Shared Service Director. They're held within the EU.
Excellent, because I think that stands us in a bit more legal stead, because we're not now beholden to the vagaries of the American legal system, should anybody want to access anything that might be in our database. Good, okay. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I want to come back on organisational resilience. Judging from Richard's answer, we're thinking of that as maintaining staff morale and keeping the workforce together. There's a wider thing around that with a fit for the future heading towards 25% off everything. I think it is. I don't have answers for this, but it is the major risk. We cut 25% off everything. We cut our services. We cut the respect that the public holds us in, and which is then demoralising for our staff, and we go on a downward spiral. And I feel the way we're approaching Fit for the Future, there's a real great big risk of that. And the area I'd take as the example would be planning, where they've now told the planning consultants profession that they won't answer the phone or don't answer queries on planning applications. Planning applications are not allowed to be changed. They've got to rely on pre-app advice and so on. And I just think that's demoralising for our officers, bringing us into demoralising. It's taking the reputation of the council down and doing big damage to the economy. Really, really big damage to the economy. So, what's the answer? Well, the answer is to listen to our budget amendments and make sure we fund the planning department properly. But I think that we're getting outside our scope. But I think that if we don't get a grip of this organisational resilience thing, we will degrade the council to a huge extent, and it's a huge risk.
And I share your concerns about reputational risk, because we do have a responsibility to all the residents of Colchester, and we have to ensure that the services that the city provides are of sufficient quality and are efficient and effective. Richard, I'm just going to bring you in for this, please.
Yeah, obviously don't want to go into great detail about the Fit for the Future portfolio, but just a reminder for members, it's a reduction of net operating cost. So we're not talking about 25% cuts, it's income, and actually a significant proportion of year one's budget savings are predicated on income, which seems to be doing quite well. And obviously the committee will hear the Q1 forecast position around that. So it's not just about reductions in cost. And I'm intrigued about the planning element, because I have quite a good knowledge of the portfolio, and there's been no savings taken from planning. So no savings targets, no reductions. So and actually I think, you know, our planning team is held in extremely high regard by both developers and also councillors. So I just want to say that I don't think any reductions have been taken from planning. Thanks.
Thank you. And I have no doubt that if you have a specific query on that, you can raise those with officers directly. The other one that I just wanted to draw attention to was F, financial inequality. And as I do, representing the second most disadvantaged ward in the city, I'm always mindful of the impact of the cost of living crisis on a significant proportion of residents in my ward, but also across the city. And I know that there are pockets of deprivation wherever we are in the city, rural or urban. But noting their support available for most vulnerable residents, etc. And I did sit on the policy panel for a couple of years where we had reports too about what the city was doing in terms of alleviating some of that crisis for individuals. I'm just mindful of the fact that the policy panel is now gone, and where that update is actually going to members, because I'm not sure it does anywhere.
Yeah, just to provide reassurance to the chair and members that that support for our most vulnerable is a key element of our strategic plan, and performance against the strategic plan is reported both to the scrutiny panel, so there's some oversight there on a 6-monthly basis, and indeed also to Cabinet, just to provide that reassurance.
Thank you, Richard. I'm reassured. And the final one, again, it's the very high, is just around corporate assets and maximising them to full potential. In order to maximise to full potential, and I know I've said this elsewhere for some time now, we need to know what all of those assets are, where they are, and how we are sweating them. So I just wonder where we're at in terms of full understanding of our corporate assets.
I think that there is, I think it's fair to say that there is a very large programme being undertaken at the moment in terms of comprehensive review of the corporate assets. And I know in my own team, our health and safety manager has been highly involved in that, in terms of looking at some of those issues relating to the assets and how we make the most of them going forwards. I don't want to put words in the mouth of the Chief Operating Officer. I'm sure they'll be reporting in the future in terms of how we take that programme forward, and there'll probably be some changes to what we do and how we do it.
Thank you, Hayley. Okay, I'm just looking around the... Councillor Dundas.
Yeah, very, very briefly, thank you for the report. Just a brief comment, really. I think what really comes out of this is just, even after the mitigation, how many are in that top right corner. And we've actually got, in pre-mitigation, we've got 2 areas which are categorised as 5 for probability, which is described as considered as certain. Then we have a very significant number of 4, which are very likely to happen. And I just think that's something we just need to take on board and realise just how high a risk some of these things are.
Thank you for that. I don't see anyone else, so that leads us on to our recommendations or our consideration. So 2.1, we're asked to consider and comment on progress and performance in managing risk over the year April 23 to March 24, which I think we've done. To consider and comment on the current strategic risk register, which we've done. Consider and comment on the proposed risk management strategy for 24-25. We haven't done much of that, but I think we've made a suggestion, which brings us on to 2.4 and then endorse the submission of this report to Cabinet to approve the risk management strategy for 24-25. And I would suggest we just add to that recommendation Councillor Sunnock's suggestion that we also include in there the need for risk management of project management going forward. Right? All happy with that? Agreed. Can I have a show of hands quickly? Yeah? Agreed. Thank you.
Just make it clear that councillors should be involved in project risk management as well. At the moment, there seems to be some type of project risk register, but it's never looked at by councillors, and we're sitting here as the Governance Audit Committee letting the big one trot completely round us.
Okay, so I'll just ask Mr. Evans to ensure that that's incorporated into our recommendation to Cabinet, please. Thank you. All right, that's item 8. Just looking at the time. Yeah, I think we'll start item 9 and see how we go, and then have a break at 7:30. So item 9 is the SIPFA position statement. We've got a detailed report in front of us this evening, and I think, Hayley, are you introducing this, or is Andrew? Andrew, yeah. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you say, you have got a detailed report on this before you, so I'm not going to take you through the report in great detail, because I'm going to assume that you've all read the report and the appendices. Hayley and I will be quite happy to answer any of your detailed questions that you have on it, but I'm going to give you an overview, and I'm going to want to just position the position statement, if you'll pardon that pun. So just to take you back a little bit, at the annual meeting back in May, I presented a report to full council that was on constitutional changes, and we trailed the fact that this report would be coming to this committee during this municipal year. So this report is part of a journey that we're going to be undertaking towards compliance with the SIPFA position statement on audit committees. There will be further reports on this as we continue the journey. So what we're not trying to do with this report is to get a big bang, if you like, in relation to compliance. It's something that we're taking on a step-by-step basis. So this report starts us off on that journey, and we start to take the steps towards compliance of the SIPFA position statement. So this version of the position statement was published by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy in 2022, and it's for local authority and police audit committees. And it sets out the practices and principles that audit committees should adopt. It's not mandatory, but it is seen as best practice, and we want to ensure that we make the best efforts that we can to adopt the principles that are set out in the position statement. Now, the position statement is accompanied by some SIPFA guidance, and members of the committee will have received that separately to the report. The reason it was circulated separately to the report, and apologies, I don't think Councillor Smalls. Oh, you have received, I just wanted to make sure. You've received that separately is because it's not something, it's something that we as an organisation have acquired. It's not a public document in that sense. It's something that you have to go through a process to obtain. However, what I want to say at this point is also that in order to assist the committee going forward, we want to create what we're calling a repository or a library of key guidance, policies, procedures, rules for this committee specifically, where you will all have access to these. And a classic example of that is this SIPFA guidance on audit committees. So that type of SIPFA guidance will be incrementally added to this depository of documentation to assist the committee in performing its role. So that guidance has included some of the details that are in this report, and I'm just going to very, very briefly touch on, if you'll bear with me. So the position statement sets out some key information. It talks around the the purpose of an audit committee, what you're here to do, how you should be running as an independent and effective committee, what the core functions of the committee are, how the membership should be comprised, the engagement and outputs from the committee, and the impact that the committee is having within the organisation. Now, what it sets out, there are some core functions in particular that an audit committee should undertake, and they are set out in paragraph 5.4 of the report. I won't read them out. It also sets out the expected characteristics of the audit committee's membership, and they are set out there in paragraph 5.5. I think we have to realise that here in Colchester, Governance and Audit Committee, by its very name, means it fulfills different functions. You are not just an audit committee, you have other functions that have been given to you by full council as part of your terms of reference. So, for example, you're also the council's standards committee. You are the council's shareholder committee for its companies, and you also look at other matters which I would class broadly as governance, separate to being an audit committee. But those principles for the audit committee sort of apply across most of your other functions. Now, one of the things the SIPFA guidance does say is that you should undertake a self-assessment. So we do an initial self-assessment, where are we now, and map the results of that against what the position statement requires us to do. And Hayley and myself have undertaken that initial self-assessment, and that's appended to the report at Appendix B. The format from that has come from the guidance. We haven't made it up. All those questions have come out of that guidance document. You can see it's got 40 questions in it, so it's quite a meaty document, but we sat down and we went through those 40 questions and we came to an initial assessment. Now you can see the maximum score that can be achieved in that self-assessment is 200. We thought we came out at around 108. So in our opinion, we thought that those initial results demonstrated that the committee complies with the basic principles of the position statement, but obviously there are areas for improvement for us, for you as a committee to consider. Now, I would just like to say at this point also that it is our view, Hayley and my view, you may not agree with our scoring, and that's for the committee to say, no, you've scored us X here, we don't agree with you, we think it should be Y, or whatever, that's absolutely fine. But so I'm inviting you to have a look at that initial self-assessment. But what, in our view, that initial self-assessment does highlight that the main areas for improvement centre around making the roles of the committee clear, what capacity the committee is acting in clear, and also reporting the effectiveness of the work of the committee and demonstrating that members of the committee have a suitable skill base. And it also refers to about independent co-opted members. And we'll come on to that, if I can, in just a few minutes. So, as the report says, we're asking you to look at that initial assessment. But flowing from that initial assessment, we then drew up an action plan, which is at Appendix C to the report. And so we've taken the initial findings, what we thought from that initial assessment, and turned it into an action plan for the committee, which helps us to move further along the road towards compliance with the position statement. One of the easy wins has been a revised Governance and Audit Committee procedure rules, which are attached at Appendix C. Now, I apologise for what I didn't make clear in the report is why you've got some lines struck out in the draft, in the Governance and Audit Committee procedure rules at Appendix D. The lines that are struck out are the existing wording that deals with what are now called the core functions. So we only had a few simple little lines that in effect dealt with that area. It is all now, everything above the area that's struck out are the SIPFA recommended wording for the core functions of an audit committee, which we've put in. There are no other changes to the procedure rules, just to give you that assurance. And what we're recommending is, if you agree those, that you send them up to full council to be ratified and they be included in the constitution. The other thing that's a quick win is a revised layout for your work programme. So it's really clear for members to understand in which capacity you are acting in any particular time on any particular item, and also how that relates back, particularly in relation to when you're acting as the audit committee, the core functions of the audit committee. And that's the proposed layout for that is attached at Appendix E to the report. What we did say back at the annual meeting was that this report would include a draft annual report for this committee on its work. So if you recall, the scrutiny panel each year produces an annual report on its work, its effectiveness, etc., and that goes up to full council. So what the SIPFA action, the position statement is actually saying is this committee should do something similar, and what we will do, officers will do, is if you agree with the proposed action plan, is prepare a draft annual report and bring it to a future meeting of this committee, and perhaps with an aim, if we can do it, of taking it to the December full council meeting for ratification. If we can do it. If we can't, Chair, if we don't think that's feasible, then we'll come back and we can adjust that. The other issue that we've got is around the position statement, just if I can just conclude by saying that there are issues around a skills analysis of members of the committee and whether or not the members of the committee have got the appropriate skills to be an effective member of the committee. Now, the guidance sets out in more detail what those particular skills are, and we need to undertake a skills gap analysis of members to see how close we are to those recommended skills that are set out in the guidance. And that's something that we will work with the committee on going forward. One of the other things that the position statement says, it talks about a more closer relationship with the internal and external auditors. And it says that you should be able to meet with them and have conversations, if you like, in a safe environment. That does not mean we have to have formal committee meetings. You can do that in an informal setting. So, for example, you can do it over Zoom, you can do it over Teams, but we do it in a private setting. So you can ask those really, if you like, really difficult questions that you want to ask in a safe environment. The other thing that we need to just touch on is independent members. Now, the SIPFA position statement says that in an ideal world, we would have independent members on the audit committee, and also potentially that they would chair the audit committee. It's something that I think is something that we can aspire to, but longer term. It's something that we need to work on a bit more and to give a lot more thought to. The other element of it, the final element that I want to mention, you'd be glad to know, is around the separation of the Governance and Audit Committee from the Executive. So both sides of the Executive, from Cabinet and from scrutiny, and so that you don't have any crossover. So ideally, you would not have members of the Executive on the Audit Committee, and you wouldn't have any members of scrutiny on the Audit Committee. I think we have to take a pragmatic view based on the political makeup of this authority. We can see what is ideal or what we should be aspiring to, but my view would be at this stage, that is something that we need to look at a bit further down the line. We take a pragmatic view on where we are at this point in time. So we have started the journey. We've made some of these initial steps. There are further actions that we need to take, but the report is basically just asking the committee to look at the self-assessment. Do you agree with what we've said, or do you want to change it? To look at the action plan, do you agree with the proposed actions that we have said? And if you also agree, the revised governance and audit procedure rules, to submit them to full council for adoption and inclusion in the work programme. And also, do you agree to changing the work programme in the manner that has been highlighted in the report? And Hayley will be quite happy to take all your detailed questions. Thank you, Chairman.
And breathe, Mr. Weavers. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'll pick up when I introduce everything when we come back in terms of the forward. I'm conscious of the fact that it's coming up to 7:30. So what I'm going to suggest now is that we have a break for 10 minutes. So we'll meet back here at 8:20, everyone, please. Thank you. Right, I think we're all back, Owen, so when you're ready. Good to go? Right, welcome back everyone, thank you. So we had that detailed introduction to the item from Mr. Weavers before we had our break. Just one or two things that I want to say before I open it up to everyone. Firstly, I think Mr. Weavers made the comment that this is a journey that we're just starting. This isn't something that we need to deal with and complete between now and the next meeting. So my view on that, having had quite a detailed conversation with Mr. Weavers before we brought this item to the committee, is that we should endeavour to introduce the best practices that are contained in the documentation that's before us this evening in readiness for the next municipal year. So that effectively gives us through to the end of March to complete, consider and do whatever we need to do to get everything in practice. There were a number of things that I was anxious about. One was the membership of the committee and ensuring that we didn't disenfranchise any member of the council. I recognise that some members, governance and audit will not be their cup of tea. However, just because somebody doesn't have a background in auditing, risk management, finances, shouldn't preclude them from being a member of this committee. So we have to ensure that there is appropriate and adequate training for all members of governance and audit, or all prospective members of governance and audit committee, before the first meeting of the committee. And I've always said that it's appropriate for training for G&A at the beginning of the year anyway. And some of the training that we do, I like to see opened up to all members of the council because it's relevant, albeit I recognise that for some members, when you start talking finances, the eyes glaze over. The other thing that I wanted to pick up on is about having private meetings, because I think there are some of the things that are discussed in this that warrant meetings in private rather than public meetings. Has already been mentioned, meetings with the auditors at least annually. They're probably best initially having those meetings in camera, where we can get into some nitty-gritty that maybe are not relevant or germane to the public at that particular time. The other one that I think is probably best left to an in-camera meeting is the self-assessment, because going through those 40 criteria in a public meeting, I'm not sure would really be of, would whet the appetite of most of the residents of Colchester. And the ideas around the way in which we structure the agendas going forward as well, I think are very positive ones. What it does mean is that instead of just commenting and noting going forward, we're probably going to be doing a lot more recommending, endorsing, looking at and suggesting. And the final point that I just wanted to raise at this stage was about whether or not, when we finish discussing this evening, we feel it's appropriate to work towards a report to council in December, because that is going to involve us in a bit of work, and certainly going to involve me in a bit of work as well. But I just want to get a sense of where you are at when it comes to that point. So those are my initial thoughts for 6. I'm now going to open up to the rest of the meeting and committee, and we'll go from here. So I've had Councillor Dundas indicate, then Councillor Smalls, and now Councillor Summock.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, lots of stuff in this. I think we were aware of some of it, as Mr. Weaver said, when there was a discussion around the report which went to full council in May, and it was decided purely for practical reasons around personnel that perhaps we couldn't implement all of it immediately. I guess my first question, or comment really, is that we've got a lot of this, as you said, in March 25 being implemented, which sounds quite a long way away, but actually it isn't. So if we're talking about potentially, having lay people on the audit committee, which I realise won't be all meetings of this, that's quite a short timeline to work out how we're going to do it. Equally with the training, it's in the detail, actually, we talk about training is going to cover the statement of accounts and members' code of conduct, but that's actually, it's fairly limited actually compared to all the things this committee does. So I wonder if perhaps we need to look at that training a bit. But my questions are really, firstly, how compulsory are the SIPFA guidelines? If we don't follow them, what are the consequences? Is somebody going to come along and wrap our knuckles and say you're being very naughty, Colchester City Council? Or have we got, or are they just recommendations which we have a fairly free hand whether to adopt or not? There's mentioned, and it was talked about, a skills analysis of its members. How are we going to do that? Are we going to have an exam? I don't know. That would be fun, wouldn't it? I know you could just simply say, well, have they done the training or not? But, are we accepting that as good enough, or how, are we doing it in groups? It's quite it's a short, easy phrase, but there's a lot of complications behind it. Equally, regarding the training, how are we going to decide what that training consists of, and who is going to do it? Are we as a committee going to have some input into putting together a training programme? So we decide some of the areas we think people should be trained on. It's very easy just to say, well, train people to look at a statement of accounts, but you're looking at such a huge area. And going back to the lay people, how are we going to, if we're going to have to start thinking about it now, because it says March 25 in the document, so if we approve the document as presented to us this evening, we're kind of saying we're going to have lay people on the committee next year. How are we going to select those? And how are we going to check that they're qualified? Are they going to be presented to the committee as here's a list of people, select a couple? I don't know. So just a few questions to start with.
Thank you. All of those I thought of and had discussed with Mr. Weavers before this meeting. I think I would just draw your attention, Councillor Dundas and everyone else's, to Appendix C, which is the action plan for improvement, and I think answers one or two of those, but not all of those questions in detail. But I think some really sound questions and comments and remarks there that all, if not most of us would have had going through this document. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Small.
To be honest, Paul's just covered everything. Because I was particularly going to ask about the lay members, because I can see that could be hugely difficult to make sure your lay members are politically independent, have got the appropriate skills, whatever they might be, and that these people are happy and interested to come and do this. So I was going to ask about that. And then the other thing is a comment. I think any training, if it is open to all the councillors, so, when you've got a night, like tonight I'm substituting, for example, or this might be something I think people think about doing in a future year. So I think, and also then it's more cost effective, I guess, if you are going to do training, to open it to as many people as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Smalls. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I found this item surprisingly interesting, and it was, I thought that Andrew Weaver's his approach was admirably pragmatic, and the thought that we would try and have total independence of the cabinet, it just strikes me, an organisation like this, when you've got quite difficult financial matters to deal with. We need the best people there, and having absolutely rigid independence and those sort of rules it doesn't feel practical. Now, a lot of it, when I read through it, the words arranging deck chairs kept on coming up, okay? These are finer, nicer points to do, and we are a council in some financial crisis. We're an audit committee with no audit, you know, so somewhere on that, I didn't see it anywhere. They don't have a slot for an audit committee with no audit. How can we be an audit committee with no audit? We've got no accounts that can be reconciled to our management accounts. We've got a deficit running at somewhere around 6 million a year. We think it might be 4 million. We don't quite know. We're heading towards 300 million of debt, and we don't sort of seem to. We then seem to get into the finer points of procedure and so on. And it doesn't seem to be quite balanced. In amongst it, there are a few points that I think would make a real big difference. The first is, I think the thought of having an independent chair, I don't know whether it would be better or worse, and then depend on who we recruited, but I think it would majorly change the dynamic. And the second thing that would change the dynamic is private meetings with the auditors. And I well remember in some of my finance director roles, I would find that there used to be a rule that the auditors once a year would meet with the non-executive directors without any of the executive present. And that was always a very healthy, I don't think they ever really did it or really had a substantial discussion, but we were moved out of the room and the auditors did have a chance to have an honest conversation with the non-execs. And I think that would have quite a big impact if we were to implement that. So those are the two most important things. I also thought that having a library of key guidance is just a very practical step. I've been banging on for ages, and I now finally have them about getting the SIPFA Treasury Management Guidelines, and we kept on being quoted rules out of all these SIPFA guidelines that we hadn't seen. Once I'd seen them, I realised that it was boring as ever, but I just think it's good practice to have access to them. So thank you very much, and basically supportive of your approach.
Thank you, Councillor Sunnox. I thought I was going to have to sanction you there for your language. It was close. And did I pick up there that you were suggesting that the way in which I chair these meetings, you'd only score me a 1?
Not in the least. Not in the least. There is no criticism implied of your chairing. And that's meant completely sincerely and from the heart.
That's fine. Yeah. Thank you, William. I'll move on now to Councillor Smith, and then I've got Councillor Naylor indicating.
Thank you. I actually find myself in a fair degree of agreement with Councillor Sunnox on this, that some of these suggestions are very sensible. Independent meetings with the auditors, definitely, I think that's very useful. Some of them show more, I think, of an ivory tower approach to it. The fact that a council has got so many councillors that it can carefully select the members of the Governance and Audit Committee, having already excluded all those who are on the Cabinet, scrutiny, boards of culture borough homes, and the other commercial companies, that doesn't leave too many councillors left. And they're meant to be people who've also got the knowledge and the interest in finance. Sad as it is, and I'm sure the people around this table will find it very surprising, but not all councillors are mad keen on finance and looking at figures. And we have to accept that. We've actually got a very small council with 51 members split between 4 different political groups. Now, this committee has to be made up in political balance, which means each of the groups has to be allocated a certain number of seats. It's asking an awful lot that those proportions of councillors that we're selecting for this committee happen to also be mirrored in each of the groups that we've got. So I do think there are some serious questions about how we handle the membership issues and particularly the substitution issues. The idea that you have a committee where you don't have substitutes either means we have very few meetings, or it means that you don't have a substitute. If you can't attend, you don't get a substitute. Well, that's going to impact the political balance of the meetings. And I've got a few questions about some of the questions. On question 12, when they were talking about the knowledge of the membership of the panel, how suitable they are, and we got a 0 because they hadn't done an assessment. I mean, actually, given this panel, I'm afraid I'd even have to give Councillor Sunnox a 5 for his knowledge and suitability for being on this panel. We've actually got a very strong panel here. And so I think there were some marks there when we were sort of harshly judged, and the suggestions that we've not had any positive feedback or impact. Well, what about when we had that meeting with Amphora? I think we got complimented by Cabinet for our efforts there in identifying some of the issues, and it certainly seems to have had an impression, because there's been an awful lot of change in Amphora since we had our meeting. So I think we perhaps on some of the scoring, we've been a little bit harsh, particularly ourselves. And finally, this idea of lay members. Sadly, I am old enough to remember the days of the best value panel, and we had independent members on that. And ultimately, we found it wasn't adding value, because the council's a complicated structure. If you have truly independent members, they don't have any background in the council. If you have quasi-independent members, like the retired councillors from whichever group's running the administration at the moment are appointed it, they're not independent. I think there's a real difficulty with that, and finding somebody who's got the skill and interest to understand council finance and wants to turn up on these evenings, I think that's going to be very difficult to find someone appropriate. And if we do find someone, perhaps I'd like to sign up for one of the political parties, because we probably could do with a council with those sorts of skills, couldn't we? So I agree with the policy of what we're doing, but I think we should be adopting the approach that most companies take with the guidelines that they're given, that if you're breaching the guidelines, it's declared in your annual document. So we're not complying with points 4, 5 and 8 for the following reasons. We're upfront about it, it's in our annual report, and we're saying, yeah, we're not having an independent chair because of these reasons, or we're having slightly different rules on membership because of these reasons. But certainly I think, going through the assessment again and improving the skills and offering the training for this group would be a great idea. So thank you very much for the work you've done on this.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on a couple of points. I'm too curious about what the nature of the sanction might be if we don't adopt what is a model practice. So that's my first point. My second point is regards the lay members, and I just wondered if there was any evidence coming from other district level authorities about how they've approached this, and if there's any lessons therefore that we might take on board, whether those experiences have been broadly very positive, or there are issues with that we can look at and give further consideration to in terms of evidence about justifying why we might or might not adopt this model.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, just very briefly, to clarify, I understood from the discussions we had earlier in the year that when we're talking about lay members, and in particular an independent chair, we're only talking about when the committee acts as an audit committee, which would probably be once a year, not as an independent chair for the whole civic year. But notwithstanding that, I would support the other comments that how you actually find that independent person, I'll be absolutely honest, I don't know how you do it, so if anybody's got any good ideas, I shall listen.
Okay, thanks. Right, I think there were one or two queries, points for remark and response from you, Andrew, or Hayley. Oh, I see. Oh, I get it. Yes, all right, we've worked this one out. So Andrew does the good cop, Hayley does the bad cop. Hayley.
I think I've remembered most of the comments, so if I've missed something, obviously let me know. But just going through the notes that I wrote, obviously one of the first questions was, what are the sanctions if we don't do this? At this point in time, there are no official sanctions. It is good practice, it's good guidance, it's an expectation of best practice from SIPFA. It will be picked up by the external, internal auditors going forwards. So when they do reviews, they will comment on our adherence to the principles and what we're doing to abide by them. But ultimately, there's no fine or sanction at this point in time. So I don't think there is anything official, as I say, at the moment. That may change in the future in terms of external verification when we're applying for grant funding, etc., depending on what sector that grant funding is in. Skills analysis, there is some examples in the SIPFA guidance about the skills analysis, so it's not just a general catch-all. It does give some guidance about the skills that we should be looking for in members and what we should be identifying, and we will be working through a example and putting together a suggestion of how we do that skills analysis. This will all come back to yourselves for agreement, so it's not something that Andrew and I will go away and do. We will put some suggestions together based on the guidance that we've got, and that skills analysis will then generate the training programme in terms of specific areas where there may be some improvements required or some skills that need improving. We have some general training already in the training programme for governance and audit, and we will carry on with those, and we'll identify any other particular areas where we think it's essential to have annual training, and that could be things like business continuity and risk management. And they will be open to all members to attend. So wherever we put training on, for us, it makes much more sense to get as many members attending that training as possible. So it's not just specific to this committee. Obviously, there will be some mandatory expectations for certain training for this committee, but it will be open for all members to attend on a voluntary basis as well. The independent person process, I mean, already you have 2 independent members of this committee when you're sitting as standards. We appoint those people every 4 years, and we go out to advert. We put a job description together, we go out to advert, and they apply. So they are known as our independent members, and they actually come into their own when we're dealing with complaints against councillors. So primarily parish councillors, when we're reviewing a complaint, we will undertake an investigation. It would then go to the independent person for review, and they will come back and state whether they consider they agree with our findings or not. And then if we sit as a committee, as a standards committee, an independent person will be sitting on that committee meeting as well. So we have a process already of how we do that. So with this process, what we will be proposing is, if you like, a job description. We will put together a proposed job description, some of the skill sets that we'll be looking for, some of the experience and expertise, and that will probably go out to advert. So we cast our net quite wide for people who want to be involved in it. We will do that assessment about whether they have any political affiliation. Our 2 independent members at the moment, one of them is a town clerk. They're not a member of a political party, but they are a town clerk. The other one is just an independent member of the public. So we will do that process to make sure they have that independency. One of the points I would like to make as well is the purpose of the audit committee is not just finance. So you've concentrated a lot on about finance and financial expertise. it's to do with governance and internal control. So we're talking about risk management, control, internal control processes, all of the procedures that we promote as part of this committee. So it's more than just a finance issue. And actually, I know, Councillor Sundance, I get your point about external audit. We do have internal audits, and you do get those reports. So we have an audit process, and the internal auditors are just as important for you as the external auditors. So having that relationship with them and having that ability to have those private conversations without officers present, so you can do that interrogation, I think it is really important. In terms of lessons from others, and going back to the independent people, there is an Eastern Region Audit Committee Chairs group, which I think Councillor Pearson is a member of. There are actually independent chairs as part of that group. At this point in time, because this is very early in our process, we haven't approached those authorities to find out their experiences of working with those independent chairs and independent people. But as part of the process, our intention is to approach those ones in the Eastern region and learn some of their lessons. So we'll be getting some feedback from them, and we'll be bringing that back to you as part of the reporting. I think that was everything that was raised, unless there's anything else that I've missed.
Thank you. I don't know, I'm just looking down my little tick boxes. I can't see anything at the moment, but Paul, did you think of something?
Sorry, it's just on independent members. I see a distinct difference between an independent member on the Standards Committee who's effectively giving the view of the person in the street, and without going into details of one case, it was very much dependent on whether someone said, how it would be interpreted by the person in the street, and having that independent member on the panel for that, acting effectively as a member of the jury, was very effective. I don't see how necessarily it would work well, so I think I'd like to see some of this information come back about how it's working in other councils before we made a decision whether it was right for us here.
I agree. Thanks for coming back with all those points, Hayley. I don't think, unless anyone, and I've not seen anyone indicate that anything else has been missed. Sean, I'll bring you in now then. Councillor Kelly?
Just a broad observation, I suppose, as a relative newcomer here. This is quite a big thing that you've put down here, and I would assume there's going to be a fair administrative overhead in the implementation of it, sort of going forward. If I could almost interpret this as almost like a backhanded insult if I had been on the committee beforehand, in that, oh, you're obviously not doing a great job because we've come up with all these ideas that how you could do it better, and obviously I wasn't there, I don't know who else was on it previously. But that to one side, is the performance and the way in which this operates sufficiently, I say bad, I don't mean bad, but not good enough, let's say, to warrant the administrative burden and the costs associated with doing that, to do this? And therefore, are the residents of the city going to be, are the benefit that they get from this, which I think is quite good, by the way. I don't think it's bad, but what I'm saying is there's a lot of work to do here, and are they going to see that when there's obviously going to be loads of people doing stuff to manifest this and make it happen, when they could perhaps be doing something else?
Okay, I think that's a really valid question and remark. My personal view is there is lots of stuff in here that is positive, that we probably should be adopting and following, but there are some parts of it that we ought to be cautious about, and that's one of the reasons we should be cautious about it as well. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come back to the point I think Councillor Naylor said about were there any potential sanctions around not following this? What we didn't mention before was that in May this year, the government published some statutory guidance on best value interventions. And that was under several headings. And one of the headings that they had got is around our governance arrangements. And what they have listed as a characteristic of an authority that's potentially failing is that, and I'll get the exact word for you, that the effectiveness of the audit committee is undermined and there is no regard to SIPFA's guidance on audit committees. So you could therefore argue that if we don't do this and there is a potential issue, it would be one of the categorisations of potential failure for the authority. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Andrew. So I'll come back to say my personal view as chair of the committee is that there are lots of positives in here for us to follow, but I'm mindful of the amount of work that this is likely to involve committee members in, but also, as you've quite rightly pointed out, Councillor Kelly, the support. I mean, just going back to Paul Smith's comment about how we've been self-assessed, even though we haven't been involved in that self-assessment, as having only a score of 1 for our knowledge levels. It's interesting that just below that, the adequate support for the committee is rated a 5.
Maybe we should write that up.
So anyway, I take the point, and I think we need to take the initial self-assessment with a slight pinch of salt. It was best endeavours, and I thank Hayley and Andrew for putting that together for us to at least ruminate on. We'll have to go forward with that, but there is lots of stuff here. So I think in terms of independent members, I'm getting a flavour from around the room that we probably want to put that somewhere on the back burner for now. Yeah. So we'll park that. Lots of the other things, if you look at the SIPFA Audit Commission guidance on audit committee membership and characteristics, there's some good stuff in there, but we also need to be cautious about implementing it in totality, because it does talk about apolitical membership of governance and audit. Are we ever likely to get apolitical membership? I just throw that out. I'm not answering the question. It's rhetorical at this particular stage. But I think, producing a report that goes to full council is probably a good thing coming from GNA. We do look at we do auditing, risk management, as well as finance oversight, and we all get very engrossed in that, but it's essential that the other members of the council are aware of what we're doing and what we've been concerned about over the course of a municipal year, or not concerned about, whatever the case may be. So I think there are some good things in there. The idea of having a non-public meeting with the auditors, both internal and external, I think is a really good one. So I think what I would ask members to do, looking at the proposed revised rules, so we've got to review and agree the proposed revised Governance and Audit Committee procedure rules. I think that's fairly straightforward. Andrew's made it relatively easy for us. I queried because I wasn't sure what the squiggling was, but having looked at it again, I'm comfortable with that. I don't know whether everybody else is, so I think we can take a quick decision on whether or not we agree to that. To comment on the proposed change to the layout of the committee's work programme, I don't have any real difficulty with the suggestions for doing so with that. It's the plan of action that I suppose we need to take a view on this evening about which parts of the plan of action we're prepared to accept and move forward with, and how we timetable that moving forward with. Councillor Dundas.
Yeah, on that, I think I'm happy perhaps to leave something in there regarding the independent people, that we continue to review it or investigate it or keep it under review. That's a good phrase, isn't it? But I think in terms of actually sort of pressing the green light on it or go ahead this evening, I don't think we're quite in the place to do that, to be honest with you. I'd also just say on the training, I think it would be appropriate that, I think we should have training and I think we should agree to it, but I would like to see a proposed, I don't know if syllabus is the right word, or details of what that training is going to consist of, who is going to carry out that training, actually come back to this committee to be reviewed before we actually commission anything or confirm anything.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Yes, I see merit, I think, in the annual report to the council, and I think that putting that forward along the timescales is a sensible thing, because it shows exactly what we're doing and raises the concerns. So I think that bit should go forward. I think further work needs to be done on membership and on substitutions as to how we can fit that in with the current situations that we have on the council, because it's important that we get people on this panel who, as of this evening, everyone has participated in the debates. We don't want to have people who just turn up because the leader collared you the night before saying, we need someone at that committee. What's going on? I don't know. Just sit there and follow the others. So I think we need to look a little bit at the membership as well.
All right, thank you. Okay, so let me just come back to the easy ones then. So the proposed revised governance and audit committee procedure rules. Are we in favour of recommending those?
Agreed.
Agreed? Yeah? Okay, I'm seeing nods and hands up, so that's fine. Then we've got the proposed action plan. So I think what we're saying in terms of the proposed action plan is there are still some I's to be dotted, T's to be crossed, and one or two things to be parked for now. Certainly in terms of the training syllabus, and I like that. I think that's a good description for it. Perhaps we could prevail upon Andrew and Hayley to draft a training syllabus to circulate to members for members to then comment upon. And we can bring that back to the next meeting, because I think we're going to have to add this as an agenda item for our next meeting, aren't we? Even if it's just to check in where we're at in terms of the timetable. Andrew?
Could I suggest, Chair, that Hayley and myself take note, obviously, of what the committee has said this evening and revise the action plan and bring it back, bearing in mind the comments that members have made this evening, so you can have another look at it alongside, perhaps, with the draft of the annual report, if that's agreeable.
Yeah, and
thank you, Chair.
Mindful of Councillor Kelly's remarks, I'm happy for you to do that. Councillor Kelly.
It's just with what you've said in mind there, would it be possible, when you go back to this, to put down an additional column where you give an estimate as to the sort of level of effort that would be required for each one of these to be implemented, so that when we were to look through them, not in terms of like, 2 hours or 3 hours, but as in like, this is a high level of effort, this is a medium level effort, this is a low level of effort. So we could make an assessment, like looking across them and go, right, here are some quick wins that we could take for not a lot of effort and minimum admin overhead in order to do it. That would be very useful.
Chair, yes, of course, we'll do that.
Okay. Again, I think without making it overly onerous for the two of you, we've got dates in the action plan, but you might want to, when you're rejigging the action plan, just be mindful of whether those dates need to shift either forward or backwards. All right, so that makes it a bit easier for members. Those in favour of Andrew and Hayley going away and doing all that work for us, please show. Okay, I think that's unanimous. Thank you. Right.
With strong support for Councillor Kelly's point
Yeah.
on making sure that the benefits outweigh the administrative burden. We've got to simplify this ship if it's going to work.
I agree. Okay, I mean, it may be that we want to have another look at those 40 points and whether or not we need 40 self-assessment points or some of them merge, because I think when I looked at it, I thought there were some of them that were almost duplications. All right, so the other thing that we need to be mindful of is the fact that we're probably going to have to plan in at least one or two private meetings between now and the end of the municipal year. One of those, we've got a clearer idea of what's happening with the audit and meeting with the auditors. And the second one is for us to do catch up and undertake our own self-assessment. Right, all happy with that? Yeah, I'm not seeing any dissension, so I think we're agreed. Okay, have I missed anything? I'm just having a look. Review and comment, we've done that. Consider the contents of the position statement, we've done that. Review and agree the proposed, yeah, we've done that. And comment on the proposed change. Right. Okay, thank you one and all. Councillor Sunnox, just before we move on then.
Oh, we're on the work programme now.
We're about to move on to the work programme. Okay, right, all right. So I think we're finished with item 9. We'll move on to item 11, the work programme. Did you want to comment on the work programme?
Yes, you partly answered it already, but we mustn't let the audit, the elephant in the room, slip away from us. Shouldn't we have an item on audit progress on the 10th of September, and ideally a private session with the auditors after the meeting?
Okay, so yes, I've had that very conversation with Chris Hartgrove and Andrew Smalls as part of another meeting this afternoon. The intention is that they'll bring back to our September meeting an update on where we're at with the auditors. They were picking up some up-to-date information around what's going to happen with the backstop and with BDO moving forward just this morning. So yeah, I'm hopeful that we will have an update on where we're at with the auditors at the September meeting. And so therefore, yes, you're quite right, that should go on as part of the agenda. David, did you want to come in on that one at this point?
A simple point, you've heard it, which is, I have the same impatience that members of the committee will have. We're behind on the schedule for whatever good reason, so I want that to happen at best pace. I have to say, going back a bit, Chair, I really welcome the conversation tonight and also the joint endeavour to strengthen the voice of governance and audit, and transient members of the executive are always just that, but in that role, that's absolutely right. The council is strengthened if your presence and your voice is strengthened. So in every sense, I'm in favour of including, as I say, data and information as soon as we can get it to members of the committee.
Thank you. Andrew.
Yeah, Chair, could I suggest that on the 10th of September, you've got item 5 listed in core, which is Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman's Annual Review. That report need not go to that meeting. If that would be easier to take that out and push it down into the November meeting where you've got other items, and then your core element of the 10th of September is purely around finance.
Thank you. I'm just having a look at what we've got in the November meeting. I think we might need to squeeze another meeting in looking at what we've got on the agenda for 26th of November, because we've got CBH Q2 performance, which is a significant item. We've got the Q2 budget report, treasury management, etc. So I think we're probably looking at having to, as well as now putting the action plan for G&A into the agenda probably for the next 2 or 3 meetings. So I think we're probably, Matt, going to have to find another meeting, aren't we, to cover off some of this. We've got, yeah, I think if you leave it with the group spokespeople and myself to look at dates with Mr. Evans, and we'll find some way of just shifting around the work programme going forward and bringing that to you to our September meeting. But bearing in mind what we've just agreed as well with the audit and the audit committee action plan being additional items on that agenda for September. Anything else on the work programme? Councillor Dundas.
Yeah, very briefly. Apologies, actually, it might have been the last item, but Colchester Fibre, which was originally scheduled for this meeting, I wouldn't want to see that be forgotten, because I don't think we really know what's going on there, if I'm brutally frank, or certainly not many councillors seem to. Are we going to put that into probably the CCHL report, 29th of October? Is that the plan, or just want to make sure it doesn't get lost?
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't want to see that lost, but it probably makes sense for that to come into the October meeting when we have CCHL before the beak. Yeah. Anything else on the work programme? No? Okay. Thank you very much. So we just agree, subject to those amendments and the group spokespeople looking at an alternative or another date for a meeting when Matthew has found us 2 or 3 to consider. Okay, so that's item 11 dealt with, and now we move on to part B, I think. Have I missed anything? Yeah, but I think we've dealt with everything on the agenda. I'm just double checking. Thanks, Matt. So at this stage then, I'm just going to move the exclusion of the public in accordance with section 100A, subsection 4 of the Local Government Act 1972. I move to exclude the public, including the press, from the meeting so that any items containing exempt information by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972 I'm missing the, can be considered. There we go. It was on the next page. All those in favour?